Another edition of Behind the Lines, presented by TheLines.com and BetMGM Sportsbook. I'm Eli Hershkovich, joined as always by Christian Cipollini, trading manager at BetMGM. How we doing, Christian? How was the Week 15 results? How were the results at BetMGM?
Yeah, people listening should be happy because this was a losing week for the book for sure. Got beat up all over the place. Last night wasn't good either on the Vikings. So, yeah. So hopefully people got money in their pockets.
I did not. So you go back to last night. Let's touch on Bears-Vikings as we record here on Tuesday, December 17th, ahead of Thursday Night Football in a couple days. Favorites go 12-4 straight up, 10-6 against the spread. And the Bears now 2-14 straight up, speaking of straight up records, versus the NFC North the last 3 seasons, the worst of any team across the NFL, rightfully so, playing all those teams 6 times a year. And the Bears going back to the matchup, the blowout loss to Minnesota in Minneapolis, almost dead even in yards per play, 4.7 to 4.6. You had the 2 4th-and-1 failures in the first half, one being in plus territory. Caleb Williams also fumbles in plus territory, and then you have a touchdown wiped off the board to begin the third quarter because Doug frickin' Kramer, it sounds like a Chicagoan, Doug Kramer, failing to report as an eligible player on the DeAndre Swift would-be touchdown. I know you can't say, or there are going to be some bettors that say, okay, why bet on bad teams they don't cover? But bad teams do cover, just not this year, and Bears +7 was a perfect example of that.
Yeah, well, the book's with you on that one because we needed the Bears pretty bad, especially to cover, but it would have been better to win, and yeah, they never really had much of a chance. So, yeah, it's unbelievable.
All right, so let's stay positive, looking ahead to Week 16. Hopefully going to bounce back here for myself and for the book. First week probably this season and ever I'm rooting for the book to bounce back because I'm guessing I'm going to be on the same side as BetMGM, or at least in terms of what the sportsbook needs. The 9-5 Denver Broncos traveling to LA, SoFi Stadium, to take on the 8-6 Chargers. Speaking of bad beats, luckily I was not on the Colts. However, I'm sure Colts bettors are licking their wounds going back to Week 15 in the Mile High City because Denver wound up blowing out Indianapolis thanks to a flurry of points in the fourth quarter, despite getting outgained 4.3 to 3.2 yards per play. Denver's defense now has 3 pick sixes in their last 2 games. Nick Bonito, by the way, surging in the Defensive Player of the Year market, has 2 of them. And Bo Nix, if you want to look at the negative, net negative for Denver, despite their record winning 4 straight overall, straight up, and covering all those games in the process, 5 picks in his last 2 games. So that correlates with Denver's poor offensive production, at least going back to the Colts game. On the flip side, the Chargers have dropped 2 straight games, and they're favored by a field goal. Despite that, -110 on the point spread, with the Chargers being favored by 3. Is there any sharp action so far on this game, or just overall what stands out when you look at the handle?
Yeah, so what we've seen so far, this is on a key number. So we've taken a majority of our bets so far has come in on the Broncos at +3. Some of that's been a bit sharp. Assuming if this line's going to move, it's going to move towards Denver. If anything, probably not towards the Chargers. So we have seen more action on that +3 with the intent that maybe it does go that way. I do think it's a bit surprising. I mean, I wouldn't have guessed it, in the beginning of the season that we'd end up needing the Chargers in this one. But that's the way it's looking right now. Yeah.
I asked you this last week, and I think it's worth resurfacing in terms of the topic. When I ask what is sharp action, can you go into the details there?
Yeah. We have basically a list of bettors that we have that, throughout the years, we've been able to identify that these bettors are usually ahead of where the line ends up closing. So if this person's betting it at +3, there's a pretty good indication that it's not going to be +3 come Sunday morning. And that's just been historical throughout. That's usually what we'll use to follow. If we take a big bet for couple 100,000, that's not going to move the line the same way that some of these players that we have in our system betting even for a smaller amount. They could bet it for $1,000, and that might be something that moves the line versus something that over a couple 100,000. And it's basically just off their historical rating and the way they performed over the years. It's not always necessarily that they've gotten it right. I mean, a lot of times they're right more often than not, but they are almost every time on the right side of where that number closes at.
Let's shift over to player props for Thursday Night Football. For instance, you look at Gus Edwards with J.K. Dobbins out, still missing the last 3 games and remaining on the sidelines for Thursday Night Football. Edwards, the Chargers starting running back, coming over from Baltimore. His rushing yards prop, 37.5. Any takers at a low number there, or any other player props stand out for Broncos Chargers?
No, I was glad you brought him up because he was the one I was going to touch on. From what I've seen, his unders actually on his rushing and his longest rush were 2 that stood out to me when I was looking at player props leading into this. And also the other one that stood out to me was Bo Nix's rushing yards. We got hit pretty good on that at 16.5. And so that one already got moved a bit. And then there was one other that I saw, which was Quentin Johnston, under 3.5 receptions. So people fading him as well.
Give me a Bo Nix pick, because I'll likely be on the Chargers in this game, just like what BetMGM needs, at least so far, looking at the handle. But over to Saturday, 2 big matchups here. One being an AFC matchup, not a divisional affair, but the 9-5 Texans favored by 2 against the 13-1 Kansas City Chiefs. Both teams clinching their division titles over the last couple weeks, so playoff positioning very, very important ahead of this matchup. And Patrick Mahomes, another big storyline out of Chiefs-Texans, dealing with a right ankle sprain. So on the surface, the line maybe indicates that he won't play, with Houston being favored. But if you go back to Mahomes and his ankle history when it comes to injuries, in the NFL, 6 times he's dealt with ankle injuries, and he hasn't missed a single game on those occasions. So now dealing with that right ankle sprain, do you think the line pretty much says, okay, Mahomes not playing, it's going to be Carson Wentz against Houston, or still a little bit of wiggle room there?
Yeah, this line is basically telling you that he's not playing. I think it could move all the way up to Texans -3 if we do get that confirmation, but it's certainly leaning that he won't play. If he does play, this line will probably flip back towards the Chiefs being the favorite. A lot of probably what this plays into, too, is the fact that the Chiefs are in a very tough part of their schedule. They play Saturday, then they go back and play Wednesday again. So you would think the fact that they're 13-1, they have a 2-game lead over the Bills, that if you were playing this smart and thinking about the future, you probably would sit him for this one. And then, as win or lose, you probably even consider resting him again for that Wednesday game as well. So that's where the market's leaning. That's where the bets we've taken so far have leaned to.
Worth noting, too, when we talk about quarterback injuries, just drifting back to Chargers Broncos, Justin Herbert dealing with a left ankle injury, but he did have a limited practice in Monday's walkthrough. So big for anybody looking to back the Chargers, and that's also indicative in the point spread why we haven't seen any movement in terms of the number, even though there is sharp action, as you alluded to, on the Broncos, still at the key number of 3 for Thursday Night Football. But looking at the other Saturday matchup, Christian, the 10-4 Pittsburgh Steelers at the 9-5 Baltimore Ravens. Lamar Jackson and the Ravens favored by 6. I believe this line was at 6.5 on Monday, so a little bit of movement towards Pittsburgh, total of 45. And I want to touch on the AFC North odds here in a moment, but you say it every week. There's always Pittsburgh action at BetMGM. I'm guessing it's the same case here in Week 16.
So we did have that at 6.5. So some of it was a mix of public and sharp action that ended up moving us. Now that we've gone on to the 6, we have started taking more Ravens money. This one is probably one that will probably go a little bit mixed. It's a division game with a lot of points, and we have had a lot of Pittsburgh backers. Probably depends a lot on Pickens. If Pickens ends up playing, I think we'll probably end up splitting this one as we get closer to kickoff.
Yeah, another big injury to touch on. So looking at the AFC North odds, Pittsburgh -175, Baltimore +140. When I was staring at this line, I was saying to myself, why not bet the Ravens to win the division if I like Baltimore to win this game, which I do, after the Ravens lost in Pittsburgh earlier in the year. Justin Tucker missing a couple big field goals in the first half of that game. Lamar Jackson, a couple turnovers too, that, or at least one that cost Baltimore in the second half when they were driving. I would much rather bet the Ravens at plus money in among the division odds rather than laying the number or even laying a pretty steep money line price in this game.
Yeah, I definitely think you're onto something on this one, because they're pretty heavily favored to win this game, and then if they do, the Ravens have two left at the Texans, where they probably won't be favored. If anything, they might be it'll be close to a pick 'em. And then they go the Browns at the end of the season. But Pittsburgh has a very tough schedule as well. They play the Chiefs next, so question mark if they will have Mahomes or not for that. If they don't, obviously they have a much better chance. So yeah, this one is a very weird one. Definitely, I think if you like the Ravens instead of taking a money line, you might have pretty good odds at taking them on the division in this one.
Yeah, for all intents and purposes, these two teams tied atop the AFC North if Baltimore does cover or at least wins the game straight up. As you all know by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up with BetMGM yet, use promo code THELINES, that's the lines one word, and you will get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code THELINES. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game. You'll then receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets if your first bet loses. Just make sure to use bonus code THELINES when you sign up. See BetMGM.com for terms. 21 plus only. U.S. promotional offers not available in New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 8778-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona, 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts, 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa, and 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only, subject to eligibility requirements. Rewards are non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire within 7 days. In partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THELINES and get your $1,500 first bet offer today. Looking at NFL MVP quickly here, Christian. Lamar Jackson plus 700 to win the award. Second shortest odds behind Josh Allen. Now minus 1,000 after Buffalo upset Detroit. And in Detroit, or up north, I guess, or in the Midwest where I'm located. So you look at the MVP odds and the market in general. Do you think that race is over, like the odds indicate, or any wiggle room there for Jackson to potentially sneak it home?
I personally think it's over. I agree with where the odds sit at minus 1,000. I think Josh has basically done enough, and he's had a lot of big moments in primetime games, which are usually pretty key in the voters' eyes. I really don't think there's going to be much more. Now, Lamar is going to have two more primetime games coming up, so yeah, there is a potential to sway. I just think it's pretty unlikely at this point, just with the fact that Josh has basically been waiting for this MVP, and it's really just all lining up. He's obviously played so well. So I personally think it's over.
I'm with you, but it is crazy to think Jackson is performing at a more efficient level and has better numbers overall than he did last year, the second MVP campaign for Jackson. But over to another big divisional matchup, looking at the NFC East. On Sunday, the 12-2 Philadelphia Eagles, a 3.5-point favorite, minus 105 at BetMGM against the 9-5 Washington Commanders, total of 45.5. We remember a few Thursday Night Football games ago, maybe a month ago, going back to, or a month and a half ago, going back to late October, Philadelphia used another flurry of fourth quarter points, which I mentioned earlier, to cover against Washington in blowout fashion. Any sharp action so far in this one, in a big NFC East matchup with, speaking of another market here, individual awards market, Jaden Daniels seemingly wrapping up the NFL Rookie of the Year award, offensively speaking?
Yeah, so for us, this is actually a weird spot currently for BetMGM. Right now, we're one of the few 3.5s out there. There are a lot of juice threes. We're holding there just because we've seen Eagles action so far, and we haven't seen any Commanders action that is really telling us to move to that three. Now, if I'm gonna make an assumption, we probably will end up at three later in the week. My guess is that's where it ends up sitting. But right now, we've taken more Eagles action, so we're comfortable at sitting at 3.5.
Yeah, getting the hook is intriguing. I need to dive a little bit more into this matchup, but worth noting, as you said, BetMGM, the only book that has a Commanders -3 or +3.5 available, albeit juiced at -115. But last but not least here in terms of handicaps, before we get to your NFL Week 16 best bet, staying in the divisional matchups. Looking at the NFC North, the 12-2 Detroit Lions at the 4-10 Chicago Bears. Speaking of Chicago, going back to, or I guess going full circle to the beginning of the show, and the Lions favored by 6.5, below the key number of a touchdown. The Bears have lost 8 straight games, going back to the Tyreek Stevenson blunder on the Jaden Daniels Hail Mary to knock off the Bears toward the beginning of the season in the nation's capital. And Detroit battling for the division title with the Minnesota Vikings, tied for the division lead, but still a slight edge on the Vikings just with that head-to-head going back to their first matchup in Minneapolis. Also dealing with a cluster of injuries, including David Montgomery now lost for the season. And it shouldn't be lost, too, that Jared Goff has struggled outdoors almost every single game, despite Detroit winning in Green Bay and using a defensive score to really seal that one. Jordan Love and the Packers offense struggling mightily in an outdoor game for Jared Goff and the Lions offense. A rare win for Goff outdoors. And this one having sub-freezing temperatures most likely on the lakefront in Chicago. If this is a bounce-back game for the Bears after dropping a bunch of games in a row, I would say maybe a little bit of inclination on my end to back Chicago, just considering the spot and all the injuries on both sides of the ball for Detroit. Is there any interest at BetMGM in Chicago?
Nope. Nope. So far, no. And I don't expect it to come. Detroit's been very good off a loss, and obviously we've talked about it plenty of times that we've taken Detroit bets all year. I don't think that game last night is going to entice many Bears bettors. So, yeah, I can't imagine we're going to get much.
What about, kind of putting you on the spot here, so if you need a second, in terms of Super Bowl odds, because we touch on the Lions Super Bowl odds almost every single week, and you look at that market, the Bills and Lions now tied for the best Super Bowl odds over at BetMGM. Lions still favored to win the NFC, but the Eagles on their heels at +210, Detroit +195 in that market. Has the handle shifted at all, liability-wise, too, for Detroit to win the big game?
A bit. I think I've talked about the fact that Detroit was basically our main and only liability. So we've pretty much been trying to make sure we don't end up taking as much bets on them. So we have tried to entice some more people to bet on the Bills or the Eagles. But things have changed over the past couple of weeks. Those injuries have really piled up, and the 1 seed is a little bit in doubt at this point. And those defensive injuries, are a big problem, especially when they come into the playoffs. So their odds have gone down a pretty good amount. At this point, we still have a ton of liability on them. We are still taking bets on them, but not to the same extent. We've gotten more Eagles bets and Bills for sure. Bills the one that's been flying over the past couple of weeks with the way Allen's been playing.
Yeah, it makes sense too with that small upset. I mean, 2.5 point road dogs, but still a upset when you look at the point spread going back to week 15. And a couple of those injuries that we didn't note earlier for the Lions, Aleem McNeil torn ACL in the right knee in the Lions-Bills matchup on Sunday, and then Carlton Davis expected to miss around 6 weeks after sustaining a fractured jaw in the Lions loss to Buffalo. That is a big one in the secondary. I'm not saying McNeil's absence won't be felt for the Lions up front, but no Davis with the way Detroit's secondary has been vulnerable, at least throughout the second half of the season. And some of these games that Detroit has won, passing offenses, at least on the opposition side of things, not really much of a threat. So come the playoffs, especially if Detroit has to play on the road as a wild card team, if the Vikings wind up winning the division, certainly worth noting, just especially with all these injuries starting to pile up and then some. But looking at the NFL Week 16 odds board from your perspective, which bets stand out, Christian?
Yeah, there's two I like. I actually did a bit like the Lions, but I'm not going to use this one here.
What about the
the
Bears?
Colts.
Why
Yeah.
not back the home
No,
dog?
that's why, and that's kind of why the injuries piling up. Montgomery and the cold are kind of all factors that are keeping me away from that one. So I will. Right now, I'm going to go with the Vikings. I don't think Geno's going to end up playing, and this line's sitting at 3. I think it's going to end up being higher if we don't end up getting Geno. So if I can end up getting a Sam Howell game, I'll definitely take the other side. So I like the Vikings for the first one I like, and then the other one I like is actually Sunday night, where it's Bucks versus Cowboys, and I actually like the Cowboys here at 4-point home dogs. I think we're basically about 1 point off on this one. The Cowboys been playing way better as of late. Cooper Rush, I guess, has kind of gotten a better feel for the offense. He's decided to throw the ball to CD more. So I think they'll be able to kind of slow him down. I think we're 1 point off here. So I like the Cowboys.
You mentioned the Vikings-Seahawks matchup. Minnesota on a short week going to Seattle, tough place to play. But as you hit on, no Geno Smith, or at least for all intents and purposes, likely going to miss that game. And Sam Howell looked really, really bad, to say the least, against the Green Bay Packers on Sunday Night Football in the second half once Geno exited that game. NFC West odds are kind of interesting, with Seattle tied for the lead in the division with the Rams, but the Rams had the edge there after winning in Seattle earlier in the season. The Cardinals at plus 700, only a game back. And you look at their schedule the rest of the way, facing the Panthers this week, then a big matchup against the Rams, and then the 49ers at home. San Francisco likely going to be out of the division race at that point. Arizona might be worth a shot to win the NFC West as we look at some division odds, speaking of the Ravens earlier in the show. And then Arizona might have to dabble on a couple of division odds here after the show. Head over to BetMGM Sportsbook. But he is Christian Cipollini at BetMGM, trading manager for BetMGM Sportsbook. I'm Eli Hershkovich. Really appreciate the time as always, Christian.
Yeah, good luck. Good luck to everyone this week.
And like I said from the get-go, good luck to BetMGM, because I'll likely be needing what you guys need. Maybe I'll bet Seattle. Who knows? But he is Christian Cipollini. I'm Eli Hershkovich. Thanks, as always, to our loyal listeners at thelines.com and viewers on the Lines YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe, rate, and review, and give the video a thumbs up. Thanks for watching and listening to this edition of Behind the Lines NFL Week 16 edition. So long, everybody, and good luck with your NFL Week 16 picks.